I am delighted to welcome today some distinguished hosts who are really important in the digital health ecosystem in the NHS. We have Georgina, who is the co-founder and CTO at Vine Health. Vine Health's mission is to improve the quality and life and outcomes of people living with cancer through behavioral science and machine learning. Georgina spent her career at the forefront of health technology in both technical and leadership roles at McLaren Applied Technologies and Digital Surgery, building AI products to improve healthcare and the outcomes of patients globally. Georgina leads all the technical and product development at Vine Health, including growing and managing their technical team. I'm also delighted to welcome Owain Rees-Hughes, the founder and CEO of Synapsys, which is a technology company that's matured over a number of years and has been procured by the NHS across general practice and optometry as a platform that supports clinical decision-making at the point of referring a patient into a hospital or an urgent care clinic. Owain is also an MRC research fellow at UCL and has a training in ENT surgery. He's been on the advisory board for ERS at NHS Digital, which is the national referral system, and he's also a trained clinical safety officer. Pete Hansel is the co-founder of IlaCare. Isla brings images into the medical record, filling a much needed gap for staff, from community nurses looking at diabetic ulcers to dermatology consultants reviewing patients in primary care. He has a background in mechanical engineering at UCL and LSE and applied this to frontline health services, looking at operational improvement processes at Newton Europe before 6 years working to build or develop businesses, including Dr. Doctor, a widely used patient management platform in the NHS. Mike Kenny, my last co-panelist, is the co-director for enterprise and growth at the Northwest Coast Innovation Agency, an NHS-funded arm's length body that works regionally to support businesses, digital and transformation in the NHS. He works across digital and life science businesses to support them navigate the NHS and broker powerful partnerships with the NHS to improve services. One recent example is Safer Steps, a digital innovation which is being adopted widely to prevent falls in care settings. His background is working for a leading pharmaceutical company, Boehringer Ingelheim, on NHS partnerships as an account and operations manager. So if I take this opportunity just to frame why we're here and some of the bigger changes going on in the NHS, we've obviously had the cataclysmic events of COVID, which have been a real shock to the system. And we're at a transition point where we've had 18 months of responsive national programs and spending, which have pushed us from the middle of the pack in Europe to actually now the highest percentage of GDP going on healthcare across the EU. But at the same time, very little of that money has actually got to the front line, as budgets have been frozen for 18 months locally, meaning that commissioners and service managers are finding it really, really difficult to scale up any capability and address things like waiting lists or backlogs. We are in a position, therefore, whereby the NHS's values and ethics and what we've seen in terms of people coming together in COVID are one of the best in the world. We're still one of the most administratively efficient health systems in the world, but obviously for everyone, we're struggling with access to care and we're falling behind on that front. We've also seen some changes in organisational structure in the NHS. We've recently had a review from Laura Wade-Geary, who's the chair of NHS Digital and previous CEO of Tesco, looking at how NHS Digital, a 6,000 strong organisation responsible for NHS IT implementation, and NHSX, the unit Matt Hancock's set up to accelerate digital and tech in the NHS, and Health Education England, responsible for skills, are going to be merged into the transformation side of NHS England and improvement. We've got a focus in the NHS at the top levels on elective recovery from the Health Secretary and from the NHS leadership in terms of improving waiting lists into surgery and into clinics. But we've also got a real challenge we're left with in terms of staff morale, tiredness, burnout, trauma, mental health from COVID, that despite lots of noise, there's been very little done to address, and sets a really challenging context for transformation. So this leads me to the first question for our panelists. Given these cataclysmic events in the NHS and the direction that we're trying to go in, the problems that we're left with, why do we need startups in the NHS? What value do they bring? And what do our panelists think they've proven as a partner to the NHS so far? I was wondering if I can start with Mike.
Thanks, Tom. I think you framed the discussion really well there. In my experience working in the Academic Health Science Network, we've seen digital adoption at the scale and at the pace that we've never seen. We've achieved in 18 months things that the HSNs and other organisations in terms of digital adoption have spent 10 years trying to do. So there is, a very strong case for change that's been brought around by the absolute need that's been placed on the system, our NHS, by COVID. And I think that's proved to quite a lot of people in the NHS, both in management and also on the front line, that they can do the work that they need to do digitally, and actually that digital is an enabler in terms of producing efficiency gains and improvements in quality. And it's something that's, we don't need to fear. The concern I have is that as the pandemic becomes more of a business as usual, we're seeing the reversion to type, moving away from digital consultation, for example, unnecessarily in some respects, and as people go back to doing things the way that they used to do them. And I think we've got to understand that if you go to nursing or medical school, become a GP, a clinician, a hospital doctor, you're not being taught to provide care digitally. You're being taught to provide care via your hands, via traditional methods. So I understand why there is that need that compulsion to return to type, because that's how people were trained. But if we come back to the amount of transformation and digital change over the last 18 months or so, I think this is the opportunity where we double down on that. We've proved just how effective it can be in terms of remote monitoring of virtual wards, where literally the skills and capacity of one clinician can actually be increased 50, 100-fold without any compromise of patient quality or care. So you asked why we need digital startups. A lot of the companies that have been able to support the NHS over the last 18 months or so, and perhaps a little bit beyond, are all small to medium enterprises in the digital space. They are startups. And what COVID has done is it's proved the use case that we knew was always there all along, but perhaps others didn't in procurement and commissioning.
Thanks very much, Mike. If we can turn to Georgina, then Pete, and finally Elaine. Thank you.
Sure, thanks, Tom. Really great introduction. And like you said, at Vine Health, we are a medical device software for patients, clinicians, and life science companies. So we support patients in tracking their care in a more remote way. We link that to clinicians, and they can see that data in real time to support in their clinical decision making. But we also work with life science companies to improve the drug development process and bring better drugs to market faster. And so for us, there are huge information governance and regulatory challenges to be adopted by the NHS. And like Mike said, in COVID, the digitization and tech that can support better remote care was just so important. And I think the NHSX really recognized that, and they launched a Tech Force competition where I think it was 1,600 companies applied to have their technology piloted through COVID to support people more remotely. And we were one of 16 companies that won that challenge. And that was back in April 2020. And for us, that really showed that red tape could be cut through quite quickly, and we could launch something really fast with, it was with the Royal Marsden, leading cancer centre in the UK. And that enabled us to generate really key evidence to really show what we could do. And that was a really positive step forward. And, obviously startups have a really key focus area and are really highly motivated to go and succeed in a certain goal. And I think that's why it's so important that we are around and that we are working with the NHS in ways to innovate in the spaces that maybe they can't focus in as clearly. And so that was a really positive tool for both us and the NHS, but it was only a pilot. And I think some of those initiatives could be taken forward to more than just a pilot. And maybe this is a topic we can go back to at some point. But yeah, that's why I see startups a really positive impact in the NHS, and why we should be, and why the NHSX, or as they become NHS England, should be doing more of those kinds of competitions, or even not just pilot competitions, but longer term rollouts of technologies that can innovate and digitize certain areas.
Thanks. Yeah, fascinating conversation already. I think, it's a kind of a bold question. Why do we need startups in this space? Just to give a bit more color quickly to what we're doing at Isla. So we believe that kind of over the next decade, the vast majority of information that's going to be used to make clinical decisions will be generated by patients and generated outside of a hospital. So we're building a platform which, across as many specialties as possible, kind of enables that to be done very, very seamlessly, so that we can collect data in any type of media and file format that's required, whatever best conveys the clinical context, and then present that to clinicians in a way which helps them to make very quick decisions at scale. And so I think to tie back to kind of why do we need startups in this space, I think I was listening to a Simon Sinek talk quite recently, and so credit where it's due. It's not, this isn't my idea, but he was outlining the difference between kind of innovation and improvement. And I think it really struck a chord, because I think what the NHS is quite good at actually is kind of improvement. And so that is fairly safe, fairly stepwise, building on what we've done before and kind of optimizing something streamlining something and optimizing it over a period of time. I think where that's different to innovation is that innovation is kind of inherently quite risky, and it's messy, and it can frequently go wrong, and there's quite a level of kind of risk involved in that. And so the role that startups for me fulfill in the NHS is actually kind of pushing organizations to take some of those leaps and actually innovate, rather than move stepwise through improvement. I don't see another mechanism that's as effective as ambitious startups with, as Georgina says, a very focused goal, going and kind of tackling and innovating at pace. And so I think that's the role that we play. And for many startups that will go wrong, but I guess it's the thing that gets founders out of bed in the morning. So everyone's keen to give it a go.
Owain, can we ask you the same question? Why do we need startups in the NHS?
Yes, thank you, Tom. I think this is a great question, and I'd like to start with what used to happen before. Digital isn't new in the NHS. I think digital didn't come into the NHS with COVID, but what we've had for years and years is very bad digital. And why have we had that? Well, we've had that basically because we bought off-the-shelf products, often from America, and tried to shoehorn those into the NHS. And that's why we've ended up with, electronic patient record systems, for example, that no clinician likes, and there's, it contributes to burnout and all these problems. And, COVID hasn't just brought in digital, it's brought in digital that's fit for purpose, built, as we've heard, by people who are highly motivated, very informed, have lived these problems and want to solve things for themselves and clinicians like them or patients like them. So I think that's that's why the NHS needs a startup, because the alternative is really bad. We know it's bad, it's been around for ages, doesn't work. So we have to do things differently. And I think I'd like to give a huge amount of credit actually to the work that's been done by NHSX. You know, we've talked about, you know, sometimes people, as Peter said, there's some risks or perceived risk with working with startups. And I think what NHSX have been able to do step by step is really help manage that risk for organizations, because, you know, the NHS can't afford to take risks. You know, we're talking about the delivery of healthcare, so there's no room for risk, actually, I think. And by putting processes in place and making the rules very clear, you know, around clinical safety, around data governance, around procurement, it makes the playing field open for a lot of companies. And I think that role that NHSX have played during the pandemic has really driven these innovations that we've seen. And I think, you know, so yeah, so I'm, you know, obviously I am really pro startups, and I'm mainly pro it because I've seen the alternative and it's not good.
Thank you so much. I mean, there are a number of issues that have come out of this introductory question. So I've got here around some of the challenges around piloting and scale up, referencing TechForce 19, which of course public set up at the beginning of the pandemic to try and help out. The second around training and what people are used to and familiarity with startups, and third around governance and risk, and when you're taking that innovative leap forward, how do we do that in a way that's suitable for a safety critical enterprise like the NHS? One of the things I thought we might start a deeper discussion on is around the way that the NHS manages digital health supplies. I've just come from working with NHSX and NHS England to set up a dynamic purchasing system for iCare Technologies, and I've managed digital suppliers in a local role in Oxfordshire CCG as well. And I have to say, from an internal NHS perspective, it can be quite tricky because we can't really use the services standard contract. The commercial contract for things like gloves and needles doesn't fit perfectly. And it's hard in a busy context to think about where that contract fits in terms of how you manage services in the NHS. And how to set that up and how to make the most of it, where to buy people services, all those kinds of questions. You know, procurement in the NHS traditionally takes 9 months. I think we've seen some accelerated versions over COVID, but I'm wondering if I can look to Owain and Mike to kind of play off the two sides of the fence about how we might be able to manage digital health supplies a bit better in the NHS in a way that works for SMEs and startups. Mike, would you mind kicking us off? And then Owain can ask you for a response.
Yeah, I mean, where do we start? Procurement in the NHS is naturally, innately an incredibly frustrating experience for digital innovators. And there's loads of reasons for that. I think the procurement mindset it's based in, you know, the previous century in some respects, in terms of we need the same as we had last year but for 10% less, and that's the I'm absolutely oversimplifying it, but you get the emphasis there, that it's geared up for reprocuring things that have already been procured. And so we've got the digital innovators, digital startups that have got technologies that the academic health science networks spend a lot of time supporting, scrutinizing, curating, so that it's clear that there is utility and use for the products and platforms that digital innovators are creating. And yet, if it takes 9 months for them to be procured, at least these things have gone out of date in the time that we're waiting to get onto a framework. And actually, if you come to if you're aiming for the NHS supply chain category towers as the route into supplying the NHS, you get your product to market at the wrong time. It can be 4 years before the towers are open for you to be able to get your product on, and what a wasted opportunity, and actually what a wasted opportunity in terms of the improvements in health and care and efficiency gains that represents. So it's not fit for purpose for, it might be fit for purpose for gloves and needles, but it's not fit for purpose for innovators, digital clinical entrepreneurs, digital startups. And the HSNs, the Academic Health Science Network, are resolute in challenging that. And it's great to see, Tom, I think you mentioned, the dynamic procurement frameworks, which do level the playing field, do allow faster access for smaller companies who have got competitive products and competitive prices to be able to have their products and their technology seen by the NHS, and therefore be built in and around systems. And the Academic Health Science Networks very much are supportive of that approach and operate at that level. But still, we have the major constraints around procurement. I think from my experience, you mentioned Safe Steps, Tom, earlier. I think that's a fantastic example of a digital startup with a product that it designed around the NHS, around patients and around clinicians, around unmet need in care homes, needing to manage the risk of falls. It was an elegantly simple product that was deployable at scale with little training. And the company were absolutely fantastic in engaging the support of the Academic Health Science Network, particularly the innovation agency, my own, and Health Innovation Manchester, in the right approach to scale adoption. So at a system level, so at a Manchester level and at a Cheshire and Mersey ICS level, absolutely backed by the Academic Health Science Network in terms of real world evidence validation. And what that allowed the Safe Steps to do was to stand up in the face of, well, we need to pilot this because we're not sure it's going to work. With real world evidence, a real world validation report, it's proven that the product works in the setting which it's intended to work in. So you don't need to pilot it at that point. And then that allows the conversation to shift towards developing a business case for investment, for scale adoption, scale rollout of the product and the platform. And that's really what's happened. I think what I would say is that was a not traditional approach. It was a procurement approach, absolutely, but it was led by the system and not a hospital trust. And actually, the workarounds that were required to get to that point where a business case was being written for investment into that product, that opened the way for it to be procured and commissioned in as short a time frame as I think was possible. But it just demonstrates the right approach that you need to take in order to really sort of maximize your opportunity of having the NHS see your product, see the value of it, the value proposition, the potential for it, and then engaging it in the implementation and rollout. And I think that final point is really important for me to emphasize. So the product on its own will not solve the problem ever. A product, when you introduce a new product, digital or otherwise, into an established pathway, you've got to understand the collateral impact of doing that and be able to mitigate, ameliorate, and also understand that whenever we do anything new, it's not the patients that it touches first, it's always the workforce, it's always the front line. So in terms of rolling out stuff, it's the staff that you need to think about first, and the Academic Health Science Networks recognise that, and in countless examples, but in particular this one with Safe Steps, that co-creation of implementation and development of the training and so on, that was essential in supporting the adoption of Safe Steps, and that's a model that we deploy regularly now.
Great, thanks, Mark. I agree with all of that, really. So the first starting point is the NHS needs innovation. That there's an absolute requirement for it. So it's simply not acceptable to wait a year to go through procurements. The old way of working, is not fit for purpose. Was never fit for purpose, and that's why the NHS has legacy, really poor technology. So things have to change. And they have changed, actually. So what I've seen is that through basically the centre giving very clear guidance to regions or ICSs and developing dynamic purchasing systems, frameworks, procurement processes can happen very quickly. And I think competition is a really good thing, and it's good because good products and good companies with good solutions and the ability to implement them will be chosen by the system. So, for example, Synapters, we now work across 8 ICSs. Thousands of clinicians are using our system. We are allowing patients to stay out of hospital when they don't need it. We are supporting, GPs, optometrists, paramedics in the community to make, the best possible decisions for their patients, supported by specialists. And, when people see our product and hear about what we've done in other regions, they want to see it, and they want it in their area typically. And what I've seen actually with the changes over the pandemic is that clinicians are now leading more and more the procurement processes. So the chief clinical information officers and frontline clinicians, they are really have a very strong voice in the procurement process, where before it was such a slow process. People wouldn't see the direct impact of the decision they're making about which product they're going to choose and the one they're going to be using, in a month's time, or even quicker than that sometimes. So I think that, the need is definitely there. Clinicians want better products for their patients. They want better products for themselves, and they need to see a direct link between the decisions that they're making in terms of which products they're choosing, which products they like, which products they've heard good things about from other clinicians like them in other parts of the NHS, and getting that used by them, because their frustration is always, how quickly can we get it? Can we start next week? Can we start next month? And yes, they should be able to, and I think that's what the centre should be doing, is facilitating, and allowing clinicians to get the products that they understand the need. And when they see a demo that they like, they get the value of it. They don't need somebody else to approve them. They the NHS clinicians, frontline staff, they know what they need. They know what doesn't work, and they can really see what's going to make their lives easier and improve care for patients. So I think the NHS just needs to focus on that. I think they've done a really good job of it over COVID, and I just hope that continues, really.
Thank you. Those are really helpful reflections. So moving on now to this issue around piloting. It's so my background in health service procurement and improvement. That there's this catchphrase in the NHS, it's slightly cynical, which says that we're all in a race to be second. No one wants to stick their neck out and be the first to do something different. But if it really works, you want to be the second, if that makes sense. But also as we all know, when you're implementing technology into a complex space, like a healthcare service, where you've got the behavior of the clinician, the behavior of the managers, existing data structures and IT systems, and you have obviously how the patients will respond to your innovation. There are a number of things that we just can't know ahead of time when you introduce a technology into a service, which creates an inherent amount of uncertainty and complexity, which, as Mike referenced, there's always a fallout from in terms of collateral. So I'm not clear myself on where the right balance is between how much energy we should be putting into pilots, what data structures and evidence we need around that, and when those decisions are around, right, okay, we know enough about this, let's go. We have those decisions, as Georgina will know, in drugs. There's a very clear clear processes whereby when NICE says it's cost effective, everyone needs to do it. And that's it, it's done, it's rolled out like a carpet. I'm not convinced you can roll technology out like a carpet. And I think you need to be a little bit more nuanced in how local services adapt and respond and make use of it and make it their own and make it fit. So on that theme, I'd be really interested to hear from you first, Pete, with your engineering background, because I know you've done a lot of process changes with organizations, and now you're doing innovation with your business. And then Georgina, if you could speak about that kind of biotech versus digital and what some of the differences are and what Vine Health's perspective is on this kind of thorny issue, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I think thorny issue is a very good way to describe it, because there are clearly pros and cons to pilots. And I think on the pro side, there are world famous examples of the NHS rolling things out, which ultimately are not a good thing to do. And I think that a more rigorous pilot in multiple care settings, perhaps in multiple regions, probably could have averted some of those problems. And so as a business and as an innovator, we're kind of all for pilots. We offer a pilot actually to kind of every one of our customers before they make a purchasing decision. I'm not sure the balance of that is quite right. So there's a definite need to prove the technology across multiple different settings. And although the NHS, every hospital isn't different, and that is a bit of a myth. Like there are differences, and so what does actually work in one outpatient setting in one part of the country may not translate perfectly into another. And so I think we do need to be conscious of that. What that means for startups, I think, can be that can be extremely dangerous for startups, because if we look at what kind of kills startups, ultimately it's traction. And so if you don't make enough progress in your first 6-12 months, then money starts to run out. If money's starting to run out and you haven't got any traction and you can't show any results, then it becomes difficult to raise more capital. All of these are kind of the lessons that many startups have learned the hard way. And I think that there's a real balance between piloting, or I think the things that we need to ensure as we move into pilots, assuming that pilots kind of are a productive way to test technology, are that timescales should be very, very clear. And I think that both kind of hospital or provider more widely and startup should align on that. And perhaps even there should be some kind of standardization around the sort of timescale that we might expect a pilot for in a certain setting, because it's not unusual for a promising technology to be piloted with, you see good results at month 3, and there's that's when the penny drops for the provider, and then that 9-month procurement process that we just talked about kicks off. And so you could be a year into demonstrating a technology. If you have clinical users who are dependent on your technology, the last thing you're going to do as a company is pull that away from them. So you're in a very long kind of extended pilot period, which is largely out of the control of the company, I think. So I think timescales is a critical one. I also think
interesting to hear that, and to maybe compare it to what they're now doing in Boston. So in Boston, after the pandemic, they had like a standard 6-month piloting process where they measure the outcomes, and they have like 30 odd health specific venture capital firms in the Boston ecosystem. So they're very good at doing this. And during COVID, they've managed to use virtual ways of working and the energy that clinicians have around tech to condense exactly what they were doing in 6 months into 6 weeks. So they now have a 6-week standard pilot process in Boston. It's quite an interesting comparison to the way that the NHS likes to operate.
Exactly. I mean, and that's fantastic. And there's no reason why these pilots do need to take 6 months. I'm sure Owain and Georgina would agree. Like, there's the blockers and things that drag out these pilots are very, very operational. It's the fact that we can't get the relevant piece of paperwork signed for 2 weeks and there's a 2-week delay there. These are the small operational inefficiencies that add up to a very much extended pilot. It's often not the time it takes for clinical users to adapt to a new way of working and to demonstrate the benefit of a given technology. So yeah, I think timing is everything when you're a startup, and timing is everything for innovation and for moving fast within the NHS. So I think we could do better there. The other thing for me is kind of that proof point that we all keep mentioning. So it's having demonstrable impacts within a health setting, which is tested at sufficient scale, is absolutely crucial. And of course, that's the right way to select technologies and kind of roll them out widely. I think we have very little maturity really within the NHS in the way that we evaluate technologies, or at least that's kind of been my experience of it so far. It's almost like starting with a blank sheet of paper every time we kind of go and set up a pilot with a new trust. The HSNs have a critical role, and actually there's more that we could do as a company, and I'm sure other startups could do as well, to engage early with HSNs, because often I think the framework does exist. It's just that there's still a gap between the people that you work with day to day at the hospital and the understanding and the kind of best practice framework that may exist within the HSN. And so linking those two things together and starting to kind of centralize almost the way we evaluate technologies, I think would be a brave step, but probably a really positive one.
Which is a fantastic segue to hear from Georgina.
Great, thanks. I definitely feel a lot of the same pains as you, Pete. And, you know, I do think pilots can be a really effective way of demonstrating evidence and starting that process in working with the NHS. But I think a lot of the key pains that we find are that there's no clear trigger for the extension into a larger rollout of your technology. And often those pilots are championed by one key person that almost is doing it out of their real belief in how technology can change their particular part of the NHS, as opposed to a clear KPI that department has been given to digitize or innovate within their space. And that key person inevitably has incredibly important other priorities to do day to day. And so I think the NHS needs to encourage building in automatic triggers in these pilot contracts for the extension of that into a longer term rollout, or whatever that becomes beyond a pilot. And, you know, those KPIs should be around digitizing and automating and personalizing care and working with innovators, and seeing that as a longer term gain, as opposed to it being kind of a side thing that you do if you really see the benefit of technology. And, you know, Owain, and I know you were saying that it's clear to clinicians the things that they need. And yes, I see that in a lot of ways, but I also see them scared to take on an extra piece of responsibility to pilot something, or potentially look to the rollout of something that could have massive long-term gains, but right now is too much work. And so I think the incentivization is not in place to encourage these kind of longer term projects and rollouts. And so, you know, why not set a goal to work with, I don't know, one digital innovator a quarter to try and transform, you know, your processes or wherever it is in the NHS. And I just don't think that those are KPIs that are very clearly set out. And just to kind of go back to procurement, just briefly, they're very extremely related in here. And I see a huge duplication of effort. There always seems to be a new badge that you need to get from somewhere or someone. And maybe this merger can be for good in terms of removing some of that duplication, yet to be seen. But one of the biggest pains that we feel, that I'm sure is felt externally by startups as well, and obviously depending on the space and what kind of data you hold, you know, there's a duplication of assessment, of information governance, of the kind of champions that you need to find, of decision makers. It's very difficult to know exactly where to go to take something to a pilot and beyond. You know, going through the NHS DSPT, DAC, which is now DTAC, DCBA 129, like Cyber Essentials, NHS Code of Conduct, and then obviously externally to that, GDPR and all of our QMS set up for our CE mark. There are so many things that we've gone through where there is so much overlap. But still, you go through all of that, and then you get to a trust and they say, oh, hey, John in our IG department needs to be happy. And if he's not happy, then, you know, there's a no-go. But if he is, then it's great. So it's not a conducive way to speed up the adoption of innovation, and there is so much overlap there that it's the timelines are so difficult for a startup, and it is not acceptable, like Owain said, to wait a year to procure technologies. And like Pete was saying, startups work on funding cycles of 12 to 18 months. So, you have to prove your metrics and traction to be able to fundraise again. And within that timeline, if you can only just get a pilot started at the point at which you need to fundraise, that's not going to be good enough.
Absolutely. So tough to be asked to do the same work again and again for different badges, even if we need those to operate in a safety critical environment. There must be a way of coordinating so that where you tick a box somewhere, you don't have to do it somewhere else. Owain, I'm wondering if I can ask you, with your clinical academic background, to come in on this question of evidence and pilots and how the NHS knows that it's buying the right thing.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we're very pro pilots, I guess, whatever you call them. So, we're delivering, at huge scale. So, we delivered across, in a period of 2 months, 3 acute trusts, 120 services, more than 1,000 clinicians. So we've had to become extremely competent at delivery and helping organizations go through a change, and using Synapses as a vehicle for doing that. And competence around all the governance requirements around that. So as a company, you have to have that within your team. But once you've done that, and once you've demonstrated, your competence around those things, then there's opportunities to do a lot of innovative things around it. So we are, at the same time as delivering things at scale that we know deliver value, we're also, innovating new ways of working, around our products, and they're kind of mini pilots, if you like. And so, our implementation lead was saying, within Synapses, everything is a program, really. So there's kind of, when you're talking about project management, there's the projects and programs, and all our contracts are like programs. So it's incredibly collaborative, and that's the prize, really. So if you and nobody's saying it's easy to get the respect of decision makers and people who are buying products for the NHS. It's nobody's saying it's easy, and it shouldn't be easy. And it's our responsibility as companies and as startups to make the grade, to be the most competent people in the room, or to be an asset for the people we're working with. But the prize of doing that is that people will come to you with their problems, and they say, we would like to, use your product in this way or a different way. And it is hard. It's easier than it used to be. So I know all these badges, and there's a lot of them. God, I've filled out more forms than I ever thought I would. But at least there's badges now. Before, you had to literally try and work out what the rules were, and the rules are very opaque. At least now they're clear. They could be streamlined, but at least they're clear. But in terms of, as you were asking, Tom, what is the comparison to something like medication? So if you think of the vaccines, they went through an extremely rigorous process to be adopted at scale. And, is there a similar process for digital products? The truth is there isn't for many, and probably the same model isn't going to work for kind of systems like Synapses, which are used by systems and used to improve efficiencies. But what really resonates and what really works is the real life stories of your product being used in the NHS, and delivering value for clinicians, for patients, and for the system. And those stories are hugely powerful. And if you can quantify them and make them resonate with other decision makers, then that is really good evidence. So, if you have the accountable officer of an ICS saying, we implemented Synapsys and it is, really delivering value for our clinicians, improving care for our patients, and it's saving us money, then, there'll be follow-up questions, obviously, and people will ask for them to be quantified, but it's much better if the system tells your story than you tell it yourself.
That's really interesting. Obviously, much harder to evaluate a digital technology where, as you say, you've got these user interactions, which may be slightly different place to place, or the baseline of how people are accessing care is different from place to place, how busy people are, and the technology that you might have to integrate with or interface with is different as well. Whereas a drug is it's a similar body, whoever's taking the drug, and the criteria, it's money, is it doing what it says on the tin? It's quite easy to evaluate from that perspective. So there's a challenge there, but hearing between the lines, it sounds like that you've almost written your own evaluation criteria as a company, figured out where the value is, done that collaboratively, and kind of replicated the kinds of ways that decision makers choose what they should invest in for your own product, which may be easier and harder for different startups depending on what they're doing. So we've talked a fair amount about governance and adoption, implementation, piloting. I was wondering if we can go to training and familiarity in digital skills. There have been a number of reviews in the NHS, and Wanless review, Topol review, and Laura Wade-Geary's review. They all mention we need to upskill staff in the NHS on technology and innovation. We've had the NHS Digital Academy, which I think has been a fantastic success. We have, we've also done more with Health Education England in terms of digitizing or improving skills for boards in hospitals and other settings. And there have been, a few other programs. I feel like digital literacy has improved astronomically over the last 5 years in the NHS. I was wondering, especially Mike, from your opening remarks, where you think the NHS should be focusing now that we've got this recommendation to go further in terms of digital skills and literacy and how we approach innovation as an NHS.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So I've got two sides to there's two sides to this answer I'm going to give. So one of them is, in spite of Topol and Wanless and the recent report about NHS digital strategy, and talking about the need to improve digital literacy, I also have a view that there are a lot of people in the NHS workforce, in hospitals, in the community, in primary care, that have a sufficient level of digital literacy already. Many of us have smartphones. Many of us do our banking on our smartphones, or our shopping on our iPads or other tablets and so on. So I think that there are already significant levels of digital literacy. I think if there is a gap, it's that the NHS is not yet digital enough. And digital is not business as usual. And I allude to how clinicians and nurses, frontline staff are trained. It's not with digital methods, it's with physical methods. So when you're introducing a digital technology into a ward or a surgery, then you're introducing an element of risk and uncertainty about the application of that technology, no matter how comfortable you are with shopping on Very or Amazon or whatever. When it comes to actually caring for somebody, you increase the risk, the perception of risk. And that's something that I think that that training is really, really important. I said previously that when you're coming to do something new, before you roll it out, before you get anywhere near rolling it out, you have to engage the staff. the workforce, the people who will ultimately get their hands on it first before the patients, before it affects the patients. Because if you treat training as an aftersight, once you've done all the product development and integration, then that's when the adoption and the utility of that product and that investment that's going to be made or has been made, that's where it's going to fail, it's going to flounder, because staff, workforce who aren't supported in the right way will continue to do things the way they know and the way they trust. Because in their minds that reduces the risk of something going wrong, which is ever present. The do no harm is what doctors get taught when they start medical school. So I think in one hand, to say that we need to build the digital literacy of the NHS workforce, I think it's actually that's a bit disingenuous to the workforce. They have the digital skills. What they need is the air cover, the provision of training, the time away to do that training on new systems. They need peer review and peer support. They need the backing of the Royal Colleges to say it's okay, we can do virtual consultation and you can do remote monitoring, and we've got guidance and criteria that support that, and training and understanding and air cover. Therefore, and I think that also, so that's important, the backing of the Royal Colleges. So obviously Health Education England, becoming less of a silo and more integrated with NHS England and with NHSX and NHS Digital. That's where I see a real opportunity in some of the changes that have been announced in terms of, breaking down the silos, bringing together and co-creating the solutions, not separately. Don't develop the technology and then develop the training separately. Actually deliver them together. I think the other, really key driver is that there will never be enough staff in the NHS or in social care to provide all the care that the population needs. There never will be. So we have to leverage digital technology as an enabler to increase the apparent capacity of an individual to deliver care. So there is often a fear when we introduce digital technologies that there's a fear that the job might become less secure in health and care, and that's just not true. There's a fear that it may enable a skilled clinician to de-skill in some way, shape or form. And I would argue that actually what these tend to do is increase the skill of the individual role, because a lot of the administration, the task, the repetition, you can remove that by introducing digital technology. So there's lots of opportunities here, but what it takes is a really concerted and aligned voice and message and support and air cover from not just Health Education England and NHS EI, Digital X, but also leadership in health and care provision organisations, so the staff feel supported and encouraged to do this, and there's transparency in that. So lots and lots of issues around culture and behaviours there. But I think I come back to where I started out, that you've got to think about the workforce first when doing anything digitally that's new.
And bringing back to the why do we need startups, one of the things that startups bring that the NHS hasn't developed yet as an internal capability is an ability to work with users and modern technology stack to get really intuitive solutions. That's particularly important in health, where we know that frustration can snowball into quite understandably, emotions getting in the way of your ability to deliver compassionate care. We are very nearly at time now, so I'd like to end with each of us just painting a very brief vision for how we think startups should be working with the NHS and the NHS should be working with startups going forwards. Georgina, would you like to kick us off?
Sure, thanks, Tom. Yeah, lots of things that we've touched on today. I'm going to struggle to summarize, but I think, like Mike says, the people in the NHS that we are speaking to and talking to about our technology, they have the digital skills to adopt that technology, but they just don't have the digital incentives to do that. Having some key incentives to work with startups to go beyond pilots and roll out into longer term solutions that can actually innovate their own jobs and actually not not take away from their jobs, but actually help them do their jobs better and more effectively in a way that doesn't burn them out. Those are the kind of incentives that I think the NHS needs to deliver through to their staff. We've got some great technologies in the UK that are waiting to be adopted and rolled out into the NHS, and the risk and the clinical safety of those technologies is absolutely paramount, and getting a really good process to assess those technologies and get them into the hands of users in a quick and safe way, I think is the key.
Mike, and then Peter, please.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Georgina, as well. Really, really nice comments. I think, how can startups work with the NHS and vice versa? I think, I think, as I've said previously, the last 18 months has proved that, the NHS can adopt digital at scale for the benefit of both the workforce and also the patients, and population health. So, we know we can do it, which is really good. And I think we need to build on that. I think for digital innovators, digital startups, they've got to be coming up with products that is needed by the NHS. And I think the only way that there's many ways in which you can ascertain that, by talking to clinicians and patients, but also, leveraging the knowledge and expertise of the Academic Health Science Network. A lot of taxpayers' money goes into the development of digital innovation through Innovate UK and SBRI Healthcare and so on and so forth. So there's an absolute imperative that a return on investment comes back to UK PLC as well from that investment. And the only way to do that is to make sure that things are right in the first place, that they're needed in the first place. And then their implementation is supported. And there's lots of examples of that. I think what I would also say is that there is understanding the length of which the journey takes for a digital startup on a burning platform, looking for funding in 12 or 18 months. In order for the NHS to adopt your technology, I mean, Georgina and Peter, you've already alluded to the gateways, the DCB 0129 compliance and the Nice Health Tech Connect, and the NHS Innovation Service is coming, and the DTAC and so on and so forth. So going through all of those gateways is absolutely important, because there'll be, that's where companies will fail. It's a tick box exercise. When it comes to procurement or commissioning, have you got those? No. Well, then you need to go away and come back. But then there's another layer on top of that. So for example, in my part of the world, in the Northwest, there are a couple of pieces of architecture, digital architecture, that if a digital product doesn't fit into, then it can't be adopted. So platforms like Amity, from an infrastructure perspective, and if your product is in the remote or virtual space, then Docebo is another sort of thing that you've got to plug into. And I think that it's really hard to know what that is, and it's also varies locally. And I think that I would always encourage, of course, leveraging the knowledge and expertise of the Academic Health Science Network wherever anybody is in the UK, in order to understand those sort of nuances and get support to go through them.
Yeah, and the NHS could help with standard setting so that the API you write for the Northwest Coast also works in Essex. Okay, Peter.
Yeah, thanks everyone. I agree really with everything that's been said. I think if we zoom out, I think there is a huge opportunity here for UK PLC, as Mike put it. If we're going to position the UK as right at the forefront of driving digital health across the world, and the opportunities that and the data set that we have in the UK kind of brings in terms of computer vision and AI and the kind of, I guess, the next step of health delivery. I think there's a real responsibility on all sides, and to come back to the kind of topic of this whole conversation, that the one nervousness I would have with the big changes that we've seen are that, I suppose, NHS was specifically set out to drive that innovation in a brave and fast new way, and we need to be careful that centralizing that back into NHS doesn't undo some of that good work. I think that there's a responsibility kind of in all parts of or in all stakeholders in this. So startups need to, a lot of startups need to stop complaining about the kind of the table stakes to operate in the NHS. You know, it's a hugely complex organization. There are a number of things that could go wrong, which could be really damaging to patients and to the public. And so DTAC and proving the technology and the resilience and all of these things are absolutely essential requirements. And that's, you know, that's for companies to sort out before they get their first customers. I think there's, hand in hand with that, there's a responsibility for that to be made as clear as possible. And so we're fairly au fait now as a group of people listing off the types of requirements that we've just talked through. I think when I started Isla, that was the first few months where we're working out what on earth those things were. And so to help companies to accelerate kind of early in that first few quarters of setting up a business, I think that could be made much more clear. And then I think that kind of my top level thing that I'd really like to see change is just I guess a bit more bravery in terms of moving towards new technology stacks. And we've touched on it a bit. There's still an attitude that new innovations must kind of piggyback or build on incumbent systems, and more as technology stacks move forward, that becomes less relevant and more of a brake on progress. And so there's two sides to this. We don't want to fragment the patient record, but equally, if we happen to be collecting valuable new information from patients that enables us to make quicker decisions than we have been able to before, and the incumbent system can't handle that type of information, then, you know, it doesn't mean that the innovation is wrong. It means that we need to challenge the way that we're setting up the kind of health IT architecture. And so yeah, I feel incredibly positive. I think there's a huge opportunity for the UK to continue leading the way. And I think we just need to encourage each other within the system to continue kind of being brave and pushing that forward as fast as possible.
So with that spirit of collective courage and encouragement, I would like to just say a really big thank you to all the panelists today, Owain, Peter, Mike, and Georgina. Thank you very much. Goodbye.